Hi, this is Michael Waits, and we are back on India Game Changer. Today we have Balasubramanian Sankaranarayanan, the CEO of Thryve Digital Health. Bala, thank you so much for joining the show. I really appreciate your time. Before we get to the main part of our conversation, let's spend some time giving our listeners a little bit of your background for some context.
Thanks for having me on, Michael. Love this show. Well, I am a chemist by basic education with a couple of degrees in IT and in business administration. I'm a classical singer in my past life, motorsports enthusiast. I love to call myself a voracious reader, but at least I used to be. I carry at least 3,000 ebooks on my iPad, probably gone through 1,000 of them in the past decade, which is way less than what I wanted to. But I'm a digital health enthusiast at this point of time.
I love it.
Love spending time with my customers in trying to put together healthcare solutions that truly impact the health journey and care outcomes for millions. And of course, I love spending time with my family.
Yeah, all very important things. Can I ask you this? The motorsport thing is actually really interesting to me. And frankly, I don't think it's that different than the music thing, which I don't think is something you hear a lot. But I want to make an equivalency. Music is very technical and very mathematical, and a lot of people don't talk about it in these terms, right? It has order and it also has logic. If one note is out of place, in the same way that like if one character is out of place in code, it's just going to break. It's the same thing. But motorsport to me is also very technical. Like I love watching the racing, but I'm much more interested in how are they optimizing the engine? How can they do the wheel changes so fast? Like that's the part that really interests me. Can you talk about what interests you about that stuff and how you see those things as almost the same or similar?
Absolutely. Let's take the music first. I come from a family of musicians, so music wasn't new to me. It was sort of expected that I get into music, and we're talking about South Indian classical music here. So very early on I was learning music, I was performing, and I had the opportunity to go on stage with some greats of the business. Much before I even understood what it actually takes to be on stage with such greats. This is hindsight now. I feel very, very fortunate that I was able to do that. But then life happens when you're in between dreams, I guess. And I changed professions. Music is a tough business to be in as well. You are right. The kind of dedication and commitment that you need to honing your craft is something that is stupendous. And a lot of people outside of music don't realize that. I guess the same with motorsport. In my young, crazy days, I used to race bikes. And what interests me are exactly what you mentioned, the kind of dedication to the craft, not just the physical ability to race around. If you take Formula One, all of these guys are in the top point, not 1% of racing skills in the world. But the gaps between the winner and the person who comes last is so big, and you look at the y equals function of x, and the x's in Formula One ranges from physical fitness to technical strategy to happenstance on that day and luck and weather conditions and team strategy, everything else. It's actually amazing that they spend probably 9 months off the track working on things that help them deliver for 3 months on the track. That's kind of like life, right? 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration kind of thing.
Exactly. And can I make another point too? I'm pretty sure you'll agree with this. I like to say that everyone's an overnight success 10 years later. I think one of the other things that people don't realize about, let's talk about F1 racing, right? Is that these guys start driving go-karts. I didn't know this either. They really do. And like they're 5 and 6 years old. So this idea of like waking up one day and just saying, I want to be an F1 racer when I'm 23 is just not going to happen. But again, it's a metaphor for life. And the one other thing that you hinted at, but I'll say explicitly is no one succeeds alone is the other thing that I like to say, which means that like Hamilton could be the greatest driver in the world. But if Toto Wolff doesn't take that Mercedes team, right, and now it's Red Bull, which is the best team. But if Toto Wolff doesn't take that team and turn it into like a well-oiled machine, it doesn't matter. And I think, again, that's a metaphor for life as well. In other words, you can be amazing at anything, but if you don't have a team of people around you, supporting you, helping you, guiding you, you're kind of nothing. Is that fair?
True. In fact, there are a lot of conversations I have with my kids that revolve around exactly this. Obviously, my daughter, she's just graduated college. She's a psychologist, a budding psychologist, and believe it or not, a Korean translator interpreter. My son is just getting into senior high at this point of time. But I keep telling them this. Number one, you got to ask for help. You have support systems that you don't realize. And there are a whole host of things that you need to make sure you constantly ask for and get help on for you to improve yourself. This is a lifelong pursuit. It's not something that you end up saying, hey, I've done it well, and now I can just sit back and relax. Especially with the digital natives, I can tell you it's everybody wants instant gratification and instant success.
Right.
And they don't
Right.
want to put in the kind of effort that it takes to get to where you and I are at this point of time. Now, I'm not saying you and I are probably the most successful, but we've had our life experiences behind us and we are in a good place. And to get there, you need to go stage by stage from karting to the Formula Thousands and to the F3s to the F2s. And then, if everything goes your way, then F1. And even then, you need a good team for you to then be a success. I mean, there are people who have driven 200 races and who have never won a Grand Prix, right?
Right. Right. And those guys aren't terrible
Oh,
drivers.
they're brilliant drivers. They're just stuck in mediocrity for a variety of reasons. But history won't take care of that or won't realize that. History won't say, oh, he was a brilliant driver, but just got stuck in the wrong teams. They're always only going to talk about the Schumachers and the Hamiltons of the world who happen to have everything go their way.
Yeah. Can I ask you this too, though? If you believe in this philosophy that everything in life is a choice, how do you convince, whether it's your daughter or your son or the people with whom you're working or that work for you, that you never get anything you don't ask for? That you could outperform, you could be the fastest runner or the best coder or the best psychologist. But if you don't ask for a raise or ask for a different position or ask to be the driver, or as I did, walk up to the head of fixed income trading globally and say, I want to be a fixed income trader, no one's going to give it to you. How do you approach that?
In fact, that's a brilliant question. When I had the opportunity to start Thryve Digital as a company, one of the things I wanted to do was to create a very differentiated culture that'll allow a lot of my coworkers, colleagues, employees to speak up. Indians, by nature, are a little reticent. They try to shy away from the spotlight and they're very happy when they are not directly put on the spot. But as you say, the world today requires them to stand up and speak up. Now, of course, the Gen X, the Gen Zs, they're slightly different, but still not that different culturally. So, one of the things that we have in our cultural framework is innovate, collaborate, and empower. This is our cultural framework at Thryve, where empower is a big deal for us, not just empowering others, but empowering the self to say, hey, I need to be more comfortable in the spotlight. I need to be able to speak up. I need to be able to stand up for myself. I need to be able to ask questions without any hesitation. So, yeah, it's very, very integral.
So culture is super important in any company, and particularly when you're building a company from scratch. I want to ask you this too, though. If you go back 25 years and you think about how if you were building a company in India, in Thailand, where I live, or in Japan, where I lived for 20 something years, your internal company culture, because the people inside the company are all from the same or similar backgrounds, seems easier to build. Right? Because a Japanese person, we talked about this offline, right? Because embedded in any country's language is part of the culture, right? And you were joking offline, like the way somebody shakes their head can be very different and very subtle. And in Japanese, if you ask me a question and I say, hi, which literally translates as yes, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to do that thing. It translates in some cases to I understand, which is okay if you're just with Japanese people. But now, 25 years later, that the world has gone completely global, when you're building a company in India, but that's meant to be global, how do you account for the global ideas that people need to understand when you're building that culture to inculcate it into it?
Culture is one of the hardest things that I've realized to get right. Obviously, when we were growing up, I think focus was on pretty much learning. It was more the traditional Indian way of top down decision making. You look up to people with a great amount of awe and respect. And I've had the opportunity to stand on the shoulder of giants of the industry. Again, hindsight, you realize all of the things that you learn, not just directly from them, but just by watching them and assimilating how they deal with the situation. But I think today's culture is slightly different in the sense that you don't necessarily want to be looked at with awe. You
Right.
want to be looked at as someone who's approachable and someone whom your colleagues can have a casual conversation with, despite that colleague being half of my age and just graduated from school or college. So, the other aspect of culture, when you're trying to operate in a global environment, the cross cultural adaptability becomes extremely important. So, when somebody is saying, I hear you, which is to your example of hi in Japanese, I hear you doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to do it. It's just that I hear what you're saying. Doesn't necessarily mean I agree with it, doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to act upon it, but just that I hear what you're saying. So that's almost like the Indian head shake joke that we made, saying Indians shake their head in three different ways. One of them means no. You got to know Indians very, very well to know which one is actually no.
Exactly. Exactly. I just remember sitting in so many meetings with Japanese people, with people that came from overseas, and watching them react to the things that Japanese people said in English, which in most cases ended up being a direct translation in from their head into their English vocabulary, and thinking, that guy has no idea what you just said. None. And he's going to go home and completely translate it to somebody else in senior management, and it's just going to be all wrong.
Yeah, they don't call it thinking in a language, is very different from actually native thoughts in
Exactly.
that language for anything. Yeah.
Exactly. So talk to me about how you got to Thryve. Maybe just give a little bit of background about what your professional experience was like and what led into this idea of I want to start this company and why.
Yeah, I was a chemist who was looking at process engineering initially at the beginning of my career. I had a small application development shop of my own, but then middle class family. And so, in a middle class family, particularly in India in the early 90s, you do not want your son or daughter to get into business because business is seemingly cyclical. You might make some money if you're successful, but more often than not, you don't. And
Right. It's a maybe.
yeah, it's a maybe. And families that have business in their blood, of course, they're used to taking that kind of a risk profile. Families that aren't want a stable corporate job for their children. And so that's what my parents wanted for me. So I left my application development startup, if you want to call it that, in the early 90s to join a small company that at that point of time was a captive for a very large corporate in the US called Dun and Bradstreet. This startup morphed into one of the biggest IT companies in India and, of course, globally, which was Cognizant. So I had an opportunity to do a lot of things very early in my career with Cognizant. I helped them with client management. I helped them kickstart their domain delivery practices. It's serendipitous that I joined the healthcare and life sciences space. It wasn't a choice that I made at that point of time, because I was a chemist, so I had some background in that area from an education perspective. It was my first few accounts that happened to be in the life sciences and healthcare area. And so it just became that. But the company helped us invest ourselves into this industry. And obviously, apart from program delivery, technology skills, domain skills that you learn, and leadership skills and personal development skills, I sort of morphed into a business domain player, which is I was the face of healthcare life sciences for Cognizant. I was certified on US FDA regulatory affairs far ahead of the pharmaceutical organizations in APAC, even where. So, the kind of investments that we made into sort of becoming experts on the customer business, allowing us to go and say, Mr. or Miss Customer, you know what you do the best, of course. But next to you, I know what you do the best. That became sort of the mantra. And that put me in a great position to get into organizations, understand their offerings, and craft and model the offerings into the customer's business context, which a lot of companies were struggling with at that point of time. So when I left Cognizant nearly a couple of decades after I joined it, I had a stint with a French German headquartered company. Brilliant from a learning perspective, again, huge portfolio of $1.5 billion of annual revenue. But that required me to spend probably half of the month, every month, either in Bison in Paris or in Munich in Germany. So I was back to living out of a suitcase. And at some point of time, that does get tiring.
It just gets really tiring. Yeah.
Exactly. When the discussion around Thrive came up, again, it was happenstance. I was asked by one of my professional connects to provide some gyan, as we call it in India, which is sharing our experience and knowledge around the art of the possible when it comes to setting up a healthcare focused organization in India. And so they wanted me to just say what's possible, what's not, what kind of talent is available, and so on and so forth, so that they set the right expectation with their leadership team. And at the end of the discussion, the person said, join me. And I became the first employee of Thryve Digital Health. Allowed me the opportunity to come back to my roots in more ways than one, come back to healthcare, which was always my domain, come back to Chennai, which happened to be home, and of course the opportunity to start something from scratch with your seal of approval, with the culture that you want, with the kind of differentiation. And it sort of became a legacy project for me. I've been with this company for about 8 years now, probably a few more years before I decide to hang up my boots. But
Oh, don't do that.
but this would be something that I can proudly say started from scratch and built a culture that is lasting and differentiated, and built a set of leaders that are truly healthcare focused, only one of its kind in this part of the world, and be proud that we are, in fact, possibly the talent factory for the rest of the healthcare focused entities in India.
That's amazing. Can you do something for me? I want to reference something you said a little bit earlier in the conversation. And I talk about this a lot, but I want to put it into context that I heard when I was in India at a startup event. So I want to share this with you, and then I want you to follow up on it a little bit. A guy was standing on stage in his 20s, and he said, he was building an ed tech startup, and he said to the audience of like 400 people, most of whom were Indian, he said, you all know this. He said, an Indian has three choices for their career, okay? An engineer, a doctor, or a family disappointment. And the crowd laughed. I didn't understand, like I got it after he said it, but that was not what I was expecting. I was expecting lawyer or some other profession. But you mentioned earlier that like your family, which cares about you deeply, wanted you to have this sort of stable income, which is why they wanted you to join a big corporate. It makes perfect sense. I did the same thing when I graduated, right? I went right into Morgan Stanley, and I was in that business, in those types of businesses for 20 something years, very stable, right? But at some point you decided, you know what? I'm going to go right back to the beginning and do something way more risky. What was the feeling that you had yourself, even in your 40s, I'm guessing, and even from your family who are like, are you okay? Do you know what I mean? Like, what was the difference?
This is bang on. An average Indian parent would exactly have that same aspiration for their children, either a doctor or an engineer, or I would add a government job, which is a ticket to stability in most of the lower middle class income families. But yeah, when you think of where we were when we started out our careers, I think it has a lot to do with the economic situation, what your parents are doing. So, families that are used to running businesses, you would almost always find their children follow them or follow their footsteps in terms of either joining the family business or launching another business of their own. The family is so comfortable with that. But for a family that's a salaried family, where the father and or the mother is just used to a stable corporate career, the key to success, at least at that point of time, used to be either an engineer or a doctor. And it was
Right.
fueled a lot by the services revolution as well. If you look at the 90s and everything that happened post 90s, Tamil Nadu, which is the state from where I come in, I hail from, it probably generates 60% of the engineering talent in India. And a lot of them actually go into the software industry. So the Infosys, the Cognizants, the Accentures, the TCSs, the Wipros of the world, they hire hundreds of thousands of these engineers every year. And so the factory has to generate that kind of talent. And of course, getting into the IT industry means that you get probably a starting pay which is 50% or maybe even 100% more than any other industry that you can talk of, manufacturing, retail, name the industry. So it was the ticket to success for a lot of the non business families.
Yeah.
But that situation is changing now. For example, my daughter is a liberal arts graduate. And she was very clear that she did not want to be either an engineer or a doctor. So the generation that follows us is very clear as to what they want. My son wants to do gaming or content creation on YouTube or something like that, which is again so non-traditional that it might not even require him to get a undergrad degree because there is none that exists in that space. You know what I mean?
Right. To teach them how to do that. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's a new world, Michael. And we're just hoping that the next generation figures out what exactly they want.
Exactly. So I want to get back to something you said earlier. You said that Thryve is becoming the factory, the generation factory for the future of healthcare in India, which is a fascinating statement. But can you tell me like what it's actually doing and how it's transforming it and then how it becomes that factory for the future?
Absolutely, Michael. So, as a wannabe medical professional who didn't end up being a doctor myself, the next best thing to becoming a doctor and actually impacting lives was being part of the industry that creates solutions that then impacts millions of patients or members around the world. So when Thrive was incubated, it started off as an organization that provide technology and business solutions to both the health insurance side of the business as well as the care delivery or hospital side of the business. So the payer and the provider side of healthcare. And what we do is essentially provide solutions that either help deliver better clinical outcomes to patients or improve the health journey of members as they go through the health incidents that hopefully we don't want them to go through, but if they do, how do we make it such that they get the right information on time? They get the process to be as streamlined as possible so as to not add to their tensions and worries, which they would already have enough on their head at that point of time.
Yeah.
You look at also the kind of information that we can bring to bear to drive better clinical decision making for the physicians who can then say, okay, with this information, I can either get to a diagnosis faster or better and to decide on the clinical care path for my patient in a much more streamlined manner. So Thrive supports healthcare delivery and healthcare management from India. And we're talking about US healthcare here. So Thrive is directly supporting millions of members and patients get well and manage their health in a much more holistic manner. Now, when I spoke about factory,
Yep.
I didn't just talk about influencing the future of healthcare, which we are doing through technology advancements and other solutions that bring to bear deep technology, whether it is analytics, cloud, AI, and stuff like that. But also from an India perspective, when you think of creating a talent base that just doesn't exist today, when you look at healthcare experts, there are no end-to-end healthcare experts or not too many end-to-end healthcare experts that exist in this space today. So what we are trying to do is to literally be the talent factory for the rest of the industry. It's almost like creating an industry brand for Thrive that says if that person has spent a few years at Thrive, you can rest assured that they know healthcare and they know healthcare end to end.
But this is also super interesting to me because it sounds like you're building this sort of hybrid solution, almost like an operating system for healthcare, if that makes sense. Is that a fair representation of this? So you're building the human side of it as well. Like you said, a talent factory, but more so that if you've been at Thrive for a certain amount of time, it's almost like going to a really great school, getting a master's degree, getting a PhD, and then representing yourself as an expert in something. So you have that, but this is a different way to do it. But there's also a tech side of this as well that says we've employed all this technology to build an operating system for healthcare that going forward is going to make the provision of that healthcare easier and more seamless. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, we're very fortunate that we're part of an enterprise that is truly focused on creating the future of health, investing and redefining and reimagining health as we know it. So, the opportunity to do some very, very cool things in terms of trying out new technologies, creating data connections that didn't exist before, that can then provide the physician or the care delivery person a completely different picture, a better picture of a patient that can allow either a member or a patient to manage their health in a very, very different, proactive way. Opportunity exists for us today because we are part of that enterprise. The other cool thing is, as we speak about the human aspect of this, we want to create a long lasting relationship with our folks. And the only way to do that is to invest on them. And when you say invest on them, look at learning, skilling, development opportunities. I keep telling my people that if you spend a day and don't learn anything new, it's okay.
Right.
But if you spend a week and you don't learn anything new, you got to question yourself. If you spend a month not learning anything new, you're in the wrong place, probably the wrong
Yeah.
organization. That kind of an investment is something that we're making. We don't necessarily want to be the talent factory for the rest of the world, or the rest of the industry, but being realistic about it. You want your people to stay with you forever, but you know that's not going to happen. At some point of time, they outgrow
Right.
you. They want to do something bigger, better. And we want them to do that as well. The only thing we tell them is, hey, go ahead, go forth and prosper. Just keep the Thrive flag flying high wherever you are. But remember your roots. You learned healthcare at Thrive.
Yeah, we used to, when I was at Morgan Stanley, we used to call it Morgan Stanley University
Yeah.
because we kind of felt like we learned enough there to go somewhere else and do something different. But can I also suggest something else to you? Again, you said a few minutes ago that your son wants to be in the content creation business, maybe be on YouTube, maybe do some other things that you can't necessarily learn at university today and maybe never will be able to be fair, right? Because it's just so dynamic. But I almost feel like it's the same way in the healthcare industry because it's changing so rapidly that even if you go to medical school or go to nursing school or go to, become a technician inside of it, that everything's changing so rapidly that maybe you have to be at a place like Thryve to learn. And I want to double down or triple down on this idea of if you didn't learn something today and didn't learn something this week and didn't learn something this month, it's on you in a way, right? And then you can't complain later. Remember, we talked about this before. No one's going to give you anything you don't ask for. And if you're not asking to learn something new, somebody else is just going to run right past you. Anyway, I love this idea that you're building this place where people can come and learn. And in a way, you're indifferent as to how long they stay, as long as they fly that flag, yeah?
Of course, we want them to stay as long as possible. But, realistically speaking, that's all you can do. You can make sure that you provide that right framework, the right culture of learning. You give them the assets that are required, the knowledge assets that are required that keep challenging them. We have a Thrive Digital Health certification. That's a multi-year certification that builds upon itself, whether it is technology, domain, platforms, data, or the soft skills required for you to become a better healthcare professional. And most of Thrive does take advantage of that. So 93% of Thrive have enrolled themselves into this certification process. And it's not something that's easy to get through. It's a multi-year journey, as I said.
Right. So you have to have a commitment to it. And I would make the case as well. And again, tell me if I'm wrong, that the inherent motivation for someone who's actually going to end up being a great employee or even a great entrepreneur is just this idea of learning. It's not necessarily money. Like if you ask most great entrepreneurs, like, why are you building this? It's because I think the world needs it. But two, it's because every day I learn something new about this thing that I was always had an interest, but didn't operate inside of it. And that's why it's interesting as well that you say 90-something% of people sign up for this certification inside of Thryve that they know is going to take them 5 years to do. It's like getting the CFA. It's like, do you really care about finance? If you do, commit yourself to it. If not, good luck. But somebody else is going to be committed, yeah?
Money is something that I tell my kids at least is a byproduct. As long as you keep demonstrating your passion, find your ikigai, whatever that is, money will come. It's a matter of time, I guess.
I could not agree with you more. Can we talk about this if you want to talk about time? Because you've already talked about learning. When you look into the future, right? What is Thryve 5, 10, 15 years out? What do you want it to be? And this is before you retire, because I'm not letting you retire in a couple of years. Not going to happen.
Yeah. So let's look at that from different dimensions. One is a pure, let's say, scale in terms of the number of people who get the opportunity to be part of Thryve and build out the organization and take it to the next level, whatever that is. I think we will be 2x or 3x in the next 5, 10 years in terms of the scale. But that is, I think, the least of the relevant dimensions, in my opinion. I think the biggest impactful dimension, at least in this case, would be the capability. Now, Thryve in 5 years' time would have created, I would say, another 5,000 end-to-end healthcare professionals, which essentially mean 5,000 or 10,000 people who can literally walk into any other organization and start leading teams, start leading discussions around what is the value that the customers expect and how can we start delivering on that value from either a patient journey perspective or a care delivery perspective or a quality of care perspective or an access to care perspective. All of these good perspectives, I'm creating leaders who can essentially take whatever they've learned at Thryve and start delivering on that promise, whichever company that they are in. And hopefully it's at Thryve.
So I worked at Goldman Sachs. And when I was there, I was very proud of it. Because I felt like we had a certain code there that made everything we do, like we were just very proud of it. Like I was happy to wear a Goldman Sachs hat. and I didn't care what other people thought about it. And I think there was a time at Microsoft, and maybe even today, and even at Apple, where people say, where do you work? And you just say Apple, and everybody knows what it means. Some commitment to quality, some commitment to amazingness. Do you feel like you're building a team at Thryve that walks around today and says, I work at Thryve with pride?
That is the hope and that is the prayer that I go to sleep with every day, Michael. So, on an outward optic perspective, my wardrobe is filled with Thryve t-shirts or shirts, as the case may be, right? I feel proud wearing Thryve on my sleeve and on my heart. But at the same time, I know I gotta earn that feeling within each of my employee base. So now, with a Gen Z or a Gen X, you don't get that intrinsic loyalty de facto.
No.
You gotta earn it, and so that's what we are all trying to do. The leadership at Thryve, saying, "Okay, I care about you, but at the same time, not just the today's you, but the tomorrow's you who's going to be a leader, either at Thrive or elsewhere. I care about building you to be that person."
But doesn't this get back to the thing you mentioned earlier, that again, a generation ago, if you joined a big company, you looked at your leadership with awe. And don't you think it's kind of cool now that you are that guy who doesn't want to receive awe, but wants to receive that feeling of, I've instilled this pride into you, which is a very different way of managing, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. In fact, that's among the most satisfying things for any leader in this industry. The fact that you've been able to successfully impart your life experiences to a whole bunch of your colleagues and young employees and sort of groom them into next generation leaders. I mean, that's what we all aspire for, right?
Okay, I want to let you go, but I want to leave you with the last word. What's the last thing you want people to know about Thryve?
I would say, when you think healthcare and when you think healthcare capability, I want Thrive Digital Health to be in the minds of people. Just like you said, Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley, when it comes to investment banking, there are a few names that pop up immediately.
Yeah.
When it comes to healthcare, I want Thrive Digital Health to be one of the first few that pop up in people's minds. And if I'm able to do that, both in terms of external validation that, hey, these guys are doing something cool in healthcare from a capability perspective, supporting a whole bunch of people in their health journeys, or more importantly, in our employees' minds, saying, these guys have made a huge difference to me as an employee, as a Thrivian, made me feel part of the journey and was invested in me, in building me to be a better healthcare professional, a better leader for the rest of the industry. I think we would have accomplished a lot of what we set out to do.
Balasubramanian, Sankaranarayanan, the CEO of Thryve Digital Health, I cannot thank you enough for doing this today.
God bless. Thank you so much for having me, Michael. I appreciate it.